Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to those who are watching on Zoom, and welcome to the meeting for the the date being the 22nd of September 2020. So I'll ask Councillor Andrews, newly elected Deputy Mayor, to open the meeting with acknowledgement of country, please. Councillor Andrews, you're on mute, Councillor Andrews.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respect to elders, both past and present. I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here today.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. I'll read the civic prayer. Almighty God, from whom comes every good and perfect gift, we give you thanks for the blessings you bestow upon us in this Shire. Grant to those who hold office in this council the spirit of justice and truth, of wisdom and charity, that mindful of our responsibility, we may promote the welfare of your people and advance the common good. Amen. We don't have any apologies. We have all councillors present. So we have the adoption of the previous minutes held on the 9th of September. Would somebody like to move the adoption of those minutes? Move Councillor Scandrett, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Is there any discussion on the correctness? Put them all in favour. Councillor Turlin.
Page 19, where we've the motion was to put the information session on the 9th of September up on the web. Has it been on the web yet?
We are.
I believe so. I believe so, Councillor Turl. I can check, but I've given that instruction, so I believe it's there.
Mr. Paul.
Okay, I'm just asking the question. If it's there, that's fine.
Mr. Paul, through you, Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that that has been played from Council's website, and it was done so late last week, Councillor.
Thank you. Very good.
So on the correctness of the minutes, I put them all in favour. Those against, carried. Okay, so we move on to declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations?
No, the extraordinary meeting.
Oh, the minutes of the extraordinary minute.
That's 16th
Not on the
September.
run sheet. Minutes of the extraordinary meeting held on the 16th of September. Somebody like to move that? Councillor Whipper, seconded Councillor Nelson. Is there any discussion on the correctness that I put that? All in favour? Please raise your card. Those against, carry. We now move on to the declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Nil. Then there is no mayoral minute.
Yes,
There is no
yes,
public forum.
Mr. Mayor, there is a mayoral minute.
There's a mayoral minute. John Fay.
I will.
Page 2.
Sorry, I did a press release on Mr. John Fay, who passed away recently. So I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Andrews. There is a service at St Mary's Cathedral on Friday of this week, which I will be attending on behalf of council. But as I think a lot of councillors here knew Mr. Fay personally, and I had a fair bit to do with him a few years ago, not so much lately. He did a great service to the state of New South Wales as our local member, as Premier, and then Minister for Finance in the federal government. So I just acknowledge John for the work that he did in the service to his country, and also his commitment to his family in the latter years. which was through very unfortunate circumstances. So would there be any council like to make comment? Councillor McLaughlin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, just like to speak to your condolence motion. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were in Woolworths, and I saw John Fahey picking up his paper, and so I spoke to him, and I said, "How are you, John? You're looking well." And he said, "They told me 3 years ago I wouldn't make it to Christmas time," and he told me there that he'd had leukemia for all that time and he was battling it. But it was good to pass some comments on to him and talk to him. But I certainly appreciate what you've said in your mayoral minute about he being a fine premier and a very fine representative from our shire, and a local boy that went to Chevalier High, the Chevalier School, and a good sportsman in his day, as you've mentioned. But yes, it was just interesting that I caught up with him just those couple of weeks ago, and he looked quite well to me, but he did tell me the truth. He was battling a serious illness. So thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Turwin?
Yeah, and I had a lot to do with John over the years, and his wife as well, and his son. His son was my apprentice. I put him through his apprenticeship over 4 years. So I had a lot to do with him. He also was involved in the Hilltop Hall, of which I built for council. It was a government grant that he got for the community of the Southern Highlands and Hilltop. He also was the person who passed the torch to Heather in the Olympic relay coming into Bradman Oval. So over the years, we've had a lot to do with John and his wife and his family. So it's a sad day, but also he's lived a great life. I remember him clearly the time that he tackled that bloke when we won the Olympics on TV. That's amazing for a premier to do that, number one. But I also spoke to him a couple of times and said to him that one of his biggest things that he has done in his life was put the tunnel under the harbour. That was in his regime as a premier. So he really has been a forward thinker of the future, and it's a shame, but we all have our time to finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turwin. Councillor Whipper, then Councillor Halsett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to acknowledge the passing of John Fahey as well. Politics aside, he was a great man, did a lot for the state, and also for the Shire. I mean, he always had the Shire at heart. There's no doubt about that, and very unassuming in his contribution to community. I know he had a lot to do with the Steiner School many years ago as well, and had a very difficult family life at times, but he survived that, and he'll be sadly missed. So my condolences as well.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Councillor Halsett.
Yes, I'd like to say some words too, Mr. Mayor. John was a man of extraordinary talent. I think that's been reflected in what the previous speakers have said. He was a man of the people, one who had the common touch. And to be frank, from the conservative side of politics, he was someone that at any time you knew that he had the welfare of everybody at heart, including what I call the working man, and there's plenty of them still around. He really was an incredible human being. So I don't want to say much more than that, but I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Halsted. Any other councillors? Councillor Andrews.
Can't hear you.
Councillor Andrews, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, you briefly mentioned John's accomplishments in sport. He was an excellent, more than excellent rugby league player. He coached a couple of years at Oakdale, where the great Australian representative fullback Gary Dowling was playing. He spent several years at Camden and some years at the Canterbury Bulldogs. He was a terrific man. You could always have a beer with him. Often I was able to do that at the Crown Hotel at the end of the main street in Camden. He was very instrumental in helping and assisting me when I was setting up Mittagong Touch Association many years ago. We ended up with 400 members. He'll be sadly missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. And just every time you drive along the road between Mossvale and Bowral, John was instrumental in getting the funding for the upgrading of that road. And it turned it from a goat track into a very comfortable journey now between Mossvale and Bowral. So that's a legacy that John left to the Shire as well. So I'll put the mayoral minute. All in favour, please raise your hand. Carried. We now move on to the business paper, 9.1, development applications 19-1042, multi-dwelling housing containing 7 units, Oxley Drive, Bowral. Do you want another introduction, councillors?
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay,
Introduction.
I'd like an introduction, Mr Mayor.
an introduction, councillor Tell is flagging the moving. Mr Wilson.
Councillor Andrews has seconded it.
Councillor Andrews seconded it. Okay. Mr Wilson.
Mr Chair, the purpose of this report is to consider DA 19-1042, which seeks to develop consent for the purpose of multi-dwelling housing development containing 7 units at the 25 Oxley Drive, Bowral. Council to recall that the matter previously came before Council on the 26th of February 2020, when Council's resolved to defer the application pending the applicant addressing issues that have been raised by the objectors in terms of both overshadowing and also the overall building height. Proponent amended the scheme providing revised plans depicting skid-in roofs to the dwelling with the exception of those fronting Oxley Drive. The council again considered these changes on the 13th of May 2020, where it was resolved to meet with the objectors to discuss their concerns. Council staff met with both the proponent and also the objectors on the 12th of June 2020, where objectors raised concerns with respect to the skid-in roof, the building height, solar access, and also privacy. As a result of the meeting, the applicant amended their proposal on the 23rd of June 2020, deleting the skid-in roofs, introducing a pitched roof and reducing the pitch from 25 degrees to 15 degrees, with a reduction in the overall building height from 0.5 to 1.2 metres. Subsequent meeting was facilitated by council staff on the 10th of July 2020 to discuss changes. However, the applicant did not wish to participate in this meeting. The objectors agreed that there was an overall improvement. However, their concerns relating to overshadowing and also privacy still remained. The proposal is compliant with solar access requirements, providing a minimum of 3 hours of natural sunlight in the living areas of the adjacent residential buildings at the winter solstice. And privacy has been aided by a mixture of translucent windows, highlight fenestrations, and also screening. Council to be aware that the proposal was again presented to the meeting on the 12th of August, deferring the application and seeking the adjustments to be made to the built form on the site. The proponent has considered these for the council's resolution and has resubmitted the proposal in its current form for determination C. Council staff will maintain that development complies with the LEP and DCP controls, with minor departures in the lot width and also a private open space on 1 unit, and accordingly is recommended approval subject to conditions.
Questions to Mr Wilson? Councillor Scandrett, then Councillor Turwin.
Oh, and procedurally, Mr Mayor, has anyone else received today's run sheet? Because I don't think I have.
Nothing to do with this issue.
The run sheet has nothing to do with.
I'm just not sure what speakers there are on this, Mr Mayor. My question to Mr
There are
Wilson.
no visitor items. There's no visitor items. So
Thank you. Thank
the
you, Mr Mayor.
speaker is Mr Wilson. Councillor Turwin.
Mr Mayor, my question was to ask Mr Wilton, so there's been no change since really the August time it came to council, the 12th of August.
Mr Wilton.
Mr Chair, that is correct. The proponent has considered the council resolution seeking those changes. And unfortunately, on this occasion, they've basically stated they would like the proposal reconsidered in its current form. So no further changes have been made.
So units 4 and 5 single story units, both units be the same height, and unit 4 is adjusted to be on the same level as unit 5. None of that has happened.
That is correct.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Turwin.
On every occasion since February, May, August and September, council has recommended approval. Yes,
As the staff have recommended approval.
Correct.
4 times. Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions to councillor Houston?
Just a simple one, which I flagged earlier on today. Mr. Wilton, in a very succinct way, you can indicate or state that the proposed development complies with the DCP in every way, or are there some provisions that does not comply with? If so, could you indicate what they were or are?
There's basically 2 departures from the standards. One relates to lot width. It is an actual undersized lot width as it currently stands. There's an approved medium density development on the land at this point in time. And the second departure relates to private open space on one of the units, and it's only a very minor departure.
Okay,
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Any other questions? Then councillor Turley.
Just one last one. You just mentioned the variation to the standard. Have we approved in other sites the variation to the width of the block?
Through the chair, yes, we have.
So that's all.
Yeah, we are very minor.
Yep, I know, I understand. Yep.
Okay, so councillor Turley has moved the recommendation. And do you wish to speak to a councillor Turley?
No, it's been around 4 times. I think it's enough now.
Thank you. Any speakers against? Councillor Scandrick.
Mr. Mayor, I'm very concerned about this one still, because despite the best efforts of half of this council at the last meeting, there's been no change to this design since then. Those issues I just mentioned, which I think are quite significant. I mean, we need medium infill development like this, but for example, the fact that units 4 and 5 have not been reduced to single story, that neither of those units are at the same height as the other, and that unit 4 is adjusted to be on the same level as unit 5. The fact that that has not been contemplated by the applicant basically says to me that they're not particularly interested in amenity of adjoining residents. I'm worried about the departures that, particularly the solar access that Mr. Wilton's put out. So I'll be voting against this, councillors. I don't think it should proceed. And I'll be happy to hear an amendment from anyone else on that basis.
Thank you, councillor Scandrick. Any other speakers against? Then I'll put the recommendation that is being moved. Councillor Andrews.
No,
Could I speak for the recommendation?
yeah, I'd like to speak too, Mr. Mayor.
Well, if there's, that's what I say, if there are any other speakers.
Yes, you haven't said that though.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I realise Councillor Turley's made it very clear the reasons why I support the recommendation. 3 times, Council, we've deferred this this DA. 3 times, staff have approved deferred commencement. The meeting on the 26th of February, we gave reasons for overshadowing overall height of the building. The applicant submitted amended plans to comply with that meeting. Second meeting, the 13th of May. Also refused subject to a meeting, and we placed a provision that subject to a meeting being arranged between the applicant and objectors. They met, they presented amended plans. The applicant presented amended plans on the 23rd of June showing reduced overshadowing, and then we refused it again on the 12th of August, stating 4 and 5, units 4 and 5 should be single story, 4 and 5 same height, and unit 4 to be adjusted at the same level as level 5. I assume the applicant has had enough and he's determined that he's staying where he is now. If we don't approve this, it's quite obvious that this information going to the Land and Environment Court will see us lose. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. No, I think all councillors should be heard on this matter, particularly as it's been of great concern. But I think it's decision time now. And really, council did achieve some sort of consultation between the neighbours and the applicant. But, and then, of course, I understand that not everyone was happy with that. But I'm happy with the staff's assessment of the building height and the visual impact and the overshadowing. And I've been through the attachments that were provided, and it seems to me that the overshadowing has been taken into account and does comply. And the deferred commencement, particularly on page 6, seems to be okay. And so they've got some hurdles there that the applicant still has to go through. The other issue that I've always been consistent with is that I don't like spending money, particularly ratepayers' money, in the Land Environment Court, particularly when the zoning allows for the development of this on this land. So there was a bit of compromise. Not everyone's happy, but I'll have to go with the staff's recommendation after reading the report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, yeah, I think Councillor Nelson has said it all. I mean, we have had a compromise here. It's a very difficult site. It's going to be very difficult to build on here, and I believe Councillor Turlin actually suggested that we should pass it because it'll probably never get built. But well, that's up to them. But there are some hurdles, as Councillor Nelson said. They still need to get easements for their stormwater. They still have to satisfy a few things. I agree to refuse this any further. We would only mean a fight in the court, and it, as staff have said, it does meet the DCP requirements. The variation is only very small, so I think I'll have to go along with it. Some people won't be happy with that, but I think it really, you know, it is decision time, and it may not be built. We'll wait and see. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Turlin, do you wish to say anything before the vote?
No, put the motion.
Okay, so it's a planning matter, so everyone has to vote. All those in favour of the recommendation, please raise your card or hand. Councillor Andrews, McLaughlin, Nelson, Halstead?
No.
No, sorry. Councillor Turlin, Councillor Whipper and Councillor Gare. Those against? Councillor Halstead and Councillor Scandrett. I declare the motion carried. We now move to page 94.
Oh, Mr. Mayor, may I just ask a procedural question? Have we got any guests from the Department of Local Government or observers in the room today or online?
No, they're not at present. They will be viewing the video, the Facebook live stream at a later date.
Thank you.
We now move on to 11.1, construction of Church Road Oval amenities upgrade. Do you like an introduction?
Moving it, thank you.
Move Councillor Scandrett, seconded Councillor Halstead, that was.
Yep.
Is there any questions in relation to the DA, to the report? Councillor Turlin.
Yeah, this is accepting of a tender of 288,112. Is this procedurally right? Shouldn't have gone into closed council before we accepted the tender?
No.
Defer to Mr. Mooney.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, as we are not including within the report competitive tender rates, which was previously provided in the report to council on the 24th of June, it's able to be debated and considered in open council.
Okay.
But it's a tender over $150,000, and it's a add to the original tender we've approved. Is that correct?
Mr. Mooney.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that's correct, Councillor. As part of the initial tender, all respondents were requested to submit tenders in relation to the first package and the second package of works that were included in the tender documents.
And so the first tender went to closed council, did it not?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct. It went to closed council because of the need to ensure that we protected commercial interests, because included within the report was the rates offered by other tender respondents.
So one comment from me. If I
Okay, I
may.
understand.
Mr. Paul?
Look, Councillor, effectively what we're doing, this is a contract variation. You can term it as a contract variation. We've led a tender for the original works where they priced two components. Council's agreed via that tender process to accept that tender and only taken up option one. You will now effectively going back and varying that contract. So it is a tender, but it's a contract variation is the way I read it. So it's a different decision.
Okay.
No, I understand that, but logically, we have no idea, we have no documents in front of us, if the other tender were cheaper than $288,000.
Well, Councillor Turner, with respect, you're not going to have one builder building the bottom floor and one builder building the top floor. It has to be either constructed at stage and then at a later stage go out to tender for stage two. That's not the case, obviously. We've got a builder who's going to build the bottom floor. We're now effectively asking to build the top floor as well.
Okay, councillor Scandrett, you've moved the recommendation.
Yes, I'm just going to add an extra point to it. That is point 2, Mr. Mayor, and that the staff be congratulated on the outcome of this in terms of the additional funding. This is a great outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, and perhaps as we know, it has come through allocation of federal fundings, and it's been, the other monies will come to council as well as to when those projects will be commenced. So moved by councillor Scandrett, seconded by councillor Halstead. Put it, all in favour, please raise your card. Carried unanimously. We now move over to page 97, 11.2 investment report. Any questions to staff? Moved by question has been moved by councillor. Question, councillor Turner.
Yeah, as been reported this week that there's $2 trillion that have been going through the world banks and Australian banks. Have you got any update in relation to the $2 trillion of corrupt monies going through?
No, I pass that to Mr. Mooney.
No comment.
Mr. Mayor, no comment.
No.
Okay, well, maybe councillors, we should consider a lot of our banks in Australia, the 4 big ones have been caught with their, what could I say?
Pants down.
Not really transparent transactions with the underworld of the world. Anyway, okay.
So it's been moved by councillor Nelson, seconded by councillor Scandrett. Is there any further discussion? Then I put it, all in favour. Carried. We move to 11.3, page 103, proposed road closure, Waverley Parade, Mittagong. Do you wish for
Yeah, could we have a bit of information on this, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, you can, and
Yeah.
across to Mr. Mooney.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you, councillors. Councillors, the purpose of this report is to seek council approval to go on public comments for the partial road closure of Waverley Parade, Mittagong. Councillors, the proposed road closure is the first step of seeking council's approval in relation to a proposed land swap, which is required to facilitate the construction of the new Range Road over Rail Bridge and the road deviation of Colo Street at the intersection of Range Road, Railway Parade and Colo Street, Mittagong. Councillors, the replacement bridge will be constructed approximately 1.5 metres higher than the existing bridge to meet rail track clearance requirements. The increased height will result in a sharp vertical curve in the road design to enable Range Road, Colo Street and Regent Street to be reconnected. Council staff have determined that the impact of the proposed bridge and connecting road design would result in road modifications that would create significant road safety issues. Accordingly, an alternate road design has been developed to address these safety issues. In order to achieve the above proposal, Colo Street would need to be deviated, and the deviation can only be achieved through the acquisition of land owned by Winifred West Schools. Winifred West Schools have requested that in exchange for providing the land required for the Colo Street deviation project, that council consider the part closure of Waverley Parade Mittagong. The proposed road closure plan is provided as attachment 1. Council's consideration and formal approval is now sought to place the part road closure of Waverley Parade on public exhibition for a period of 28 days. Council will use its usual public notice tools such as Your Save Wingecarribee, and will also provide neighbour notification. If there are any objections lodged, a further report will be provided to a future meeting in council. And subject to council's direction, should the road closure be formally approved, a further report will be submitted to a future meeting in council to obtain the necessary approvals in relation to the proposed land swap and to address any budget implications, should there be any.
Okay, you want to add, Mr. Paul?
I'll look very briefly, councillors. This matter was the subject of a briefing to councillors, I believe it was earlier this year, although I'm trying to get that in my mind. But for me, in terms of the relevance of this particular road closure, it was a way of facilitating the 3,000 square metres of land that we need on the corner of Colo Street and Range Road in a manner that Winifred West Schools, I guess, were most happy to try and move forward. The alternative is that we would need to negotiate to acquire that piece of property. That may not necessarily be an easy thing to do. If this just doesn't happen, we may need to go to compulsory acquisition. I will say to you that the project, which is being delivered by John Holland Rail on behalf of Transport New South Wales, is very time dependent in terms of getting access to this land. They're looking to try and deliver this project within the next 12 to 18 months. Now that's an issue for them, obviously, but whilst it's not in the report, I've made it very plain to council that in my opinion, the agreement we've now got with Transport New South Wales in terms of co-funding the roadworks, so Transport New South Wales are going to co-fund the roundabout and the diversion of Colo Street. We were in a position 2 or 3 years ago where that was going to be left in council's lap. And would have been a significant impost on council. So in my opinion, the agreement we've now got with Transport New South Wales, that they will fund the bridge approaches and a proportion of the roundabout and the diversion of Colo Street is a good outcome. It's taken 5 or 6 years to get to this point in terms of brokering this deal. Some years ago, we were talking to them about even getting a pedestrian crossing on the bridge. We've now got a very good project that will be delivered there, which will benefit the community. This is part of that piece of the puzzle in making that happen.
Councillor Talbot.
Over the next week or so, can we, councillors, have a copy of that bridge design of Range Road? Because what you've got here is only the proposed road closure, but the most of the document relates to Range Road and the transfer of properties between the two. Can we have a copy of the bridge design of Range Road, please?
Councillor Turlin, there is no bridge design at this point in time. That bridge design is still being developed. What I can give you is a concept sketch.
That's fine.
The interface between the bridge and the road. Yes, absolutely, can do that. Happy to do that.
Yep. Thank you. That's all I want. Yep, that's fine.
Mr. Mayor, did you see my hand?
No, I didn't, Councillor Scandler.
Oh, I had it up when Mr. Paul was speaking. My question was to Mr. Paul and Mr. Mooney is, will we have a site sign there for all the motorists driving past to say that that plan is on exhibition?
Through you, Mr. Gentleman.
Look, Councillor Scandler, we will make sure that we pursue all avenues to make the community aware of this going on exhibition. If a sign on the site there is something you see is useful, yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Halstead.
Yeah, look, I think it'd be very remiss of us not to acknowledge at this point the intuition of Frank Iacana, Council's traffic engineer, who has been instrumental in what's gone on down here, because had he not come forth with his alternate viewpoints, we would not have got a solution like we've got, and that needs to be acknowledged somehow in the minute, or discussion at least.
I'll second that, Councillor.
Well, Councillor Halstead, I assume then you wish to move the recommendation with an addition?
Correct. Correct. You know, you formulate it, Mr. Mayor.
Point 5, that the project, that the council staff involved, namely the traffic engineer we don't name staff, but the traffic engineer involved be acknowledged for his contribution in relation to the outcome of this, this project.
That sounds good, but I find it extraordinary that the acting general manager would make that statement about not acknowledging an individual. I find that absolutely incredible. And many other councils acknowledge people that do a specific job.
Well, look, my only comment, Mr Mayor, and I 100% endorse what you're saying, Councillor Halstead. The council staff member you're talking about has had a big role to play. There have been other staff also that you may or may not be aware of that have had a significant role to play as well, both former and current staff.
Are you happy, Councillor Halstead, with that addendum at the bottom?
I'll have to be. I've just been told how to act, I think. But look, yes, I agree with it. I don't think there's any alternative, but I find it, again, I just reiterate, it's extraordinary that an individual can't be acknowledged for the work he did. But exactly the same if Mr Paul did a fabulous job on something, I'd be acknowledging him. So I just find it something you need to look at, Mr Mayor, because this is unusual, to be frank, and I just wonder where that's coming from.
Well, no, I don't think it's count. There'd be very, very minimal number of times the council staff have been. The council staff are acknowledged, but we as policy, we really don't say council staff. But I think a personal thanks to the traffic engineers involved should be done as well. So
Yeah, the traffic engineer, singular, not plural. But anyway, you know, leave it as you've done it. But I think something should happen internally at the very least.
okay, then that will happen as well, Councillor.
Thank you.
It already has.
All right, so with that, moving by Councillor Halstead and seconded by Councillor Turl. Is there any further?
Can I? Yeah, I'll debate.
Let's
I
go.
want to say a few words.
Yes, Councillor
Am
Turl.
I allowed to speak?
Yes, Councillor
Okay,
Turl.
it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary that the Range Road Bridge, even though it's not part in theory of this road closure, but it's part of the connection between the two, the Range Road Bridge has a pool fence stopping traffic from falling on to the major southern railway line. I find that extraordinary from the ARTC, Sydney Trains, John Holland, whoever you want to blame, that this bridge has got a pool fence that stops traffic from going over the bridge and a disaster happening. This has been going on for probably 40 years. It's been going on longer than Station Street, this bridge, trying to get it sorted out. It's dangerous. It's always been dangerous. And the government, whoever's been in power, has treated this particular bridge with contempt. Not one of them would take it on as serious. There's only two ways over the track. There's one under the bridge in Oxley Drive, or Bessemer Street, and this one. I find it extraordinary that we get to this point now that this council has to actually do a change of property to allow this bridge to happen. I have no problem with the road closure for Frensham. I think it's a great idea, and I think that's a positive. But the bridge, all levels of government, both levels of government, have treated this council with total contempt on that bridge.
Thank you, Councillor Turland, and hopefully this will resolve it now. Councillor Scandron.
Mr Mayor, I did say that I would second Councillor Halstead. I don't know why you've called for another seconder. Yes, I did.
You can have it, I don't mind.
Look, I think it really is. It really is.
I made it quite clear, Mr Mayor, because it's a really good outcome.
Councillor Scandron, who has their name on it? Councillor.
I'm happy for Councillor Scandron to take the kudos. That's fine.
Okay, Councillor Scandron, Councillor Turland has removed his seconder. You now, your name will be put in posterity in that resolution. I'll put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your card. Carried.
Just a question. Did Councillor Scandron vote then or not?
Yes, he voted then.
Oh, he has a habit of not voting.
Councillor Turland. 11.4, page 108. No.
So moved.
Excuse me, Councillor. Scandron. let me please read the minute. COVID-19 Community Financial Support Package Update. Moved by councillor Scandrett, seconded by
Councillor Whipper.
councillor Whipper. Down the bottom there, I didn't see you, councillor Whipper. Put the recommendation.
I've got an amendment if I can, if the mover and second will allow it.
Councillor Turley.
The mover and the seconder that council staff undertake a review of other councils in the state, read their support packages and report back to council at the end of the next month council meeting.
Well, a question for me, Mr Mayor, if I may.
Before you really need a seconder before I go any further, so I'm going to ask, is there a seconder for councillor Turlin's recommendation, a suggestion?
Mr Mayor, I'd just like to hear from Mr Paul.
Excuse me, please, councillor Scandrett. Mr Paul would like to make a comment.
And I just want clarification. If council does resolve that way, I'm not sure exactly numbers of councils in New South Wales now. I think it's 132 councils.
Yeah.
28. With all due respect, councillor, do I need to then go and find out what 127 other councils are doing around COVID-19?
May I ask you, well, why can't you just send an email off to every one of them and I'll rebound back with what they're doing at the time? It can't be a big deal. It's just one email.
Can I make a comment, Mr Mayor?
Okay, thank you. Now we are in debate. Mr. Paul has made
Debate.
so we are in debate. Councillor Nelson.
Right, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, what council normally does is when they want some comparisons, is they compare with like-sized councils. So
Okay.
you've got about 5 or 6 councils that you compare with, or councils in the adjoining area. I'd be happy with that because, 100 and so many councils is too much.
Change the motion, Peter.
Change it to like-sized councils.
That's fine.
Okay, is there any other comments? So that will be an addendum or an amendment, councillor Turley.
It's up to the other two who moved in second if they're allowed to be number 5.
I'm happy with that. It's only a small scale amount of work.
No problem.
So is there any other speakers? Then I'll wait until the amendment goes up, the addendum of 0.5 goes up.
Could I ask a question, please? Clarification.
For clarification, councillor Nelson.
How many like-sized councils actually are there?
Through you, Mr Mayor, with all due respect, that's a subjective judgment by me, I guess, as to which councils I'm going to consider to be of the like size to Witjacarriby Shire Council. And again, it could be a double.
Okay, leave it to you.
Okay, so there's 2 parts to this motion, and the first part up to 1 to 4 is, to me, the most important part. Number 5 is the addendum. I am going to ask that this be done in seriatim 1 to 4, and then with the 5 as the addition. So there is a clear resolution of council. So if there's no debate,
I just put it as an amendment. If you don't want it as what you're trying to do, just put it as an amendment.
I am saying I will put
All
it
five.
as a seriatim 1 to 4, and then 5 separately, but part of the motion. So all
You
those.
can only do that with a mover and a seconder. You can't do it by yourself. You have to move that proposal and have it approved.
Oh, I'm happy to second that.
Okay, then I will move from the chair as seconded by councillor Nelson that 1 to 4 be voted as one block and number 5 be voted as in the second part of the motion. So all those in favour of 1 to 4, please raise your cards. All councillors save councillor Whipper.
I'll go on that. Yeah.
Okay, so that's carried unanimously. All those in favour of number 5, please raise your cards. Those in favour, councillor Halstead, Turlin, Scandrett and Whitbar. Those against, councillor Gare, Andrews, Nelson and McLaughlin. I'll use my casting vote to defeat item 5 of the motion. So we now move to page 12.1, Corporate Strategy and Development Services, Community Members for the Southern Highland Regional Panel. Now
Move that way, Mr Mayor.
Move councillor McLaughlin, seconded councillor Andrews. Is there any discussion on the appointment of those 2 members? Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I raised this prior to the meeting as to why this hadn't been dealt with a couple of months ago, so that we would have the lead time to ask the community for any nominations. I'm not making any comment in a negative way, just to be clear, no comment about the current members there. But it was just the fact that this, with a 3-year appointment, should have gone out to the community for expressions of interest, which could have included the incumbents making that, renominating themselves. So I'm going to move an amendment, if I may, Mr. Mayor, that we renew the current members' appointments until February. And at that time, in the meantime, I should say, we call for expressions of interest for the balance of the 3-year term. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Scandrett. Do we have a seconder for that? I'll call a second time. Is there a second for councillor Scandrett's amendment? Then it lapses for the want of a seconder. So we have the recommendation as moved by councillor McLaughlin and seconded by
We're just getting it up now.
Andrews. Okay, no further debate. Then I put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your card. Carried and by majority, and councillor Scandrett voted against. Legal report 13.1. Somebody move with that. Do we discuss anything in closed committee? Move councillor McLaughlin. Seconded. Have a seconder to councillor Whipper. That we go into closed in relation to this. Is there any debate?
Can I just ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, councillor Halstead.
I think it's straightforward, but maybe something you want to discuss in committee. I don't know why, but I don't oppose the move to put in committee. I'm just wondering why on page 120 that there's a legal matter, or there's a number of legal matters there mentioned, Shanacy Turlin, or they're the only 2 actually. I'm wondering why the one of Turlin's would still be there when it's apparently or allegedly been settled. I don't know. You may know more than I do.
No,
That would be hard.
I can't answer that. I'll defer that to Ms. Lingard.
We need to answer that in closed.
Oh, no. I can answer it.
Get it right.
In that list. Well,
Please speak
yeah.
clearly.
Through the chair, it's fees received year to date, so the fees was received in this financial year. So that's why it's in this list as it is today.
Thank you.
Okay, councillor Scandrett. Councillor Scandrett.
On the matter of O'Shanassy, I'm curious to know why we don't show the unrecovered fees for him.
Through Ms. Lingard.
We never have, Mr. Mayor. So
The answer is it is not council. Council does not do that, and we never have.
All right, well, maybe we could have a bit of information on that after the meeting sent around. Thank you.
We can bring that to you in closed, councillor Scandrett.
Thank you.
Fine. Okay, we have the recommendation as moved by councillor McLaughlin and seconded by councillor Whipper. All in favour, please show your card. Carried unanimously. We now move over to page 121, 15.1 petition, Redford Park Estate. Somebody moving that?
I'll move, Mr. Mayor.
I'm happy to second that, Mr. Mayor. Can we have an introduction just to let us know when?
Hang on, please. We've got a mover and a seconder, councillors Whipper and Halstead. Not Whipper, Scandrett and Halstead. I'll ask comment from staff. Mr.
Well, no, Mr. Mayor, there would be no introduction. It's a petition.
There's a straight out petition, councillor McLaughlin.
Okay. Righto, that's fine.
About time you read it.
So I put that, all in favour? Against? Carried. We move to management committee reports, 16.1, page 122. Mossvale Senior, held at the Mossvale Senior Citizen.
Happy to move that way, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Nelson, seconded by councillor McLaughlin. Is there any discussion? Put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. Over to page 123.
I'll move that way, Mr. Mayor.
Move councillor McLaughlin. Second by councillor Nelson. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, question if I can.
Councillor Turlin.
These properties,
Councillor Turlin.
I think he's frozen.
Your frozen screen there, councillor Turlin.
I'm not, I can still move.
Back now.
There's something going on with his internet, I think.
Councillor Turlin, you're back on.
Okay, the nominated properties from page 123 right through to 127. Have all those properties been notified that about the Heritage Committee statements?
Through you, Mr. Pepe.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I have no, I can't comment on that. I have to take it on notice.
Have to take it on notice?
Well, the only reason why I say that, these are nominated properties from a Heritage Committee, but you haven't actually spoke to the owners.
I can answer.
Mr. Pepe.
Through the Mayor, these are development application properties that have been referred to the members of the Heritage Committee, and that's the response to those particular development applications. So all of these properties are aware of applications. They've made those applications, and these are part of the assessment submissions that have been received.
So what weight does the Heritage Committee have over the heritage architects that write, and council's own heritage architect that makes reports on heritage items?
Mr. Wilton.
Through the chair, basically these matters are referred by the notification process to the Heritage Committee. The Heritage Committee provides comment, and then we consider those comments as part of the notification process or submission process.
All the people on the Heritage Committee qualified?
Mr. Wilton. No, he can't comment. So Can't comment, councillor Turlin, on the qualifications of everybody.
Well, I'd imagine Councillor McLaughlin might have some idea. He seems to know a lot about the heritage.
Councillor McLaughlin, do you comment from?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This committee is an advisory committee only. We have some very experienced people on that committee, people with expertise in their field. We have a retired senior heritage planner for New South Wales on the committee. We have historians. We have I don't want to name them personally, but we have a very professional collection of interested people to do with history and heritage, not only buildings and architects, but professions to do with heritage gardens and the like. So there are a lot of people that give up their time and their expertise to assist council and council planning staff with regard to heritage matters.
Thank you, councillor McLaughlin. Okay, so we have the recommendation as moved by councillor McLaughlin and second by councillor Nelson.
I still have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Scandra.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could Councillor McLaughlin advise whether the committee considered the matter of Briars, that recent amendment to the DA?
Councillor McLaughlin, is it part of the minutes?
Look, I'm not sure if it's in this one. I think it was in. It has come to council. It did come. Was referred to the committee, and it was discussed. It was looked at, and we there was a report given to staff, I believe, some time ago. It's not in this one, but it certainly did raise the issues, and it was referred to the Heritage Committee.
Councillor, that's not what I asked. I asked whether the section 4.55 that recently was approved by staff went to the committee.
It did. It did go to the committee.
But it doesn't form part of the minutes. So.
It's not in this.
It's not an inquisition.
I will.
Yes, it is.
Got nothing to do with these minutes, councillor Scandrick. Councillor McLaughlin has answered the question.
Just another question, if I may.
Councillor Turner.
These are statements made by the parties in relation to the Heritage Committee, which is an advisory committee. If we find some of these statements aren't true, who actually will be ensuring that these statements are correct and if they're challenged in the court? In other words,
Oh, hang on.
That was inappropriate.
Jesus. Good on you, Ken.
Councillors, please. I'll defer to Mr. Wilton.
Through the chair, any of the recommendations, the outcomes of the actual committee itself is treated as a submission. So council staff go through those responses, as with any other submissions received during the notification period. They weigh up the veracity of that information and they take into account in part as their assessment. It doesn't it's not a foregone conclusion as to those recommendations, but at the end of the day, it is taken into account.
And remembering it is an advisory committee, so it's just advice. It's not, that's their advice. Okay.
You know, I understand that, but each independent, you're there, I've lost you, I think, have we?
No.
I don't know what's going on. Each qualified person, qualified architect that do reports for the applicant and then for council, have public liability and insurance to cover statements that they make. I'm concerned that we have statements that are made in this advisory committee that have no coverage by insurance.
Oh, we could say the same about any committee of council. We could say that about the Environment Committee. Oh, come on.
Come on, thank you, councillors. I think we're getting too in depth to accepting the advisory committee's recommendations, their thoughts.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I must say I'm concerned.
Right, I'll put a question.
Items are being,
please, councillors.
Mr. Mayor, I must say that I'm concerned that items being discussed in the committee, plural, are not being reported in the minutes.
Excuse me, councillor Scandrett. The councillor McLaughlin made the comment that it has been discussed, and you're talking about the prize, but if you want to bring up an issue, then you do it under a question with notice. Councillor, Mr. Peck.
Through the Mayor, councillors, all development applications that are heritage related are referred to the Heritage Committee members, but not all applications receive responses from the members of the committee. So it's only the only items that get reported back to the Heritage Committee are the ones that receive some level of comment or feedback that get
Correct.
discussed. So there are a lot that have no comment, no feedback. They don't get reported back through the committee, and those applications get dealt with.
Thank you, Mr. Pepping. That's my reason for asking, was we were told that the matter was considered by the committee. Thank you.
It was spoken, yes, it was spoken to.
It should be in the minutes,
Oh,
No, it
as
shouldn't
with
be.
others.
No, it shouldn't.
Oh,
Anyway,
Now, councillors, you're going into a 30 minutes recess, a 30 seconds recess.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a recommendation from a simple advisory committee. It has been moved by councillor McLaughlin and seconded by councillor Nelson. I'll put the recommendation, all in favour. Carried unanimously. I wonder what all the fuss was about.
Mr. Mayor, I've just received an email that, could I just refer something to you, sir?
Well, pause me in the line, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I've asked previously about the running sheet. I've just received a notification that an application to speak was made on Oxley Drive and receipted.
No, it wasn't. I will not enter into that discussion at this stage of the meeting. 16.3, minutes of the Sport and Recreation Advisory Committee held on the 20th of August 2020, moved by councillor Andrews, seconded by councillor McLaughlin. Is there any discussion on the advisory committee meeting of the rec committee? Put the recommendation, all in favour, carry. 17.163, questions.
No. 16.4. 152.
I have Mr. Page.
152. Arts and Culture Advisory.
Arts and Culture Advisory Committee, moved by councillor Whipper, seconded by councillor Andrews on page 152, 16.4. Any discussion? Then I put the recommendation, all in favour, carried. Now we move on to questions with notice. 17.1 from councillor Whipper. Now the question with notice is there. The recommendation is on page 164. Councillor Whipper.
Look, I'm happy to note it if I get a seconder, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, seconded by councillor Nelson.
Thank you. And but it does raise a point, Mr. Mayor, and this just to speak to it. There's no real opposition to this development at all, but there have been concerns raised around the fragile nature of some of the ecologically endangered community of vegetation on that site. So it just sort of raises some flags for me, Mr. Mayor. It's similar to the Frencham proposal that came forward before. that our environment and sustainability branch don't get the opportunity to make comment on these. And we tend to rely on external consultants, which may be okay, but it raises some concerns in as much as that they don't have a holistic picture of our aspirations in the Shire, nor the fragile nature of some of this environment in terms of habitat and wildlife corridors, where our E&S branch they're privy to all that information. So it really concerns me, and I'm just flagging that that's something that will be coming forward soon for consideration of council, because I think we do really need to get it right. The more and more that those wildlife corridors and ecologically endangered communities disappear, the more vulnerable our wildlife is. And I think that we're working really hard as a council to ensure those they stay intact. So this just raises issues of concern that need to be addressed, I think, at some point. I'm glad to hear that that will come back, and should there be any issues, that'll form part of a submission in relation to this as well, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper, Councillor McLaughlin, and then Councillor Halstead.
Yeah, look, I agree with you, Councillor Whipper. The Heritage Committee also put in an application to look at this overall DA, and we asked for a site inspection just so that the committee could have a look at, because of the heritage listing, to have a look at all those issues. And for some reason, staff declined that opportunity. So we would have liked to have had a look at that as well. But of course, this being the development that it is, it'll go out of our hands to the JRPP because of the money involved. And that's a bit disappointing. I hear where you're coming from. We would have liked to have added a bit of value to that DA from the heritage side of things as well. But I appreciate your sentiment there. And I'm glad that we will get that opportunity at some stage to put in a submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. I will declare I'm on the JRPP, but as we are not debating the issue, we're debating the manner as opposed to the actual issue. Councillor Halstead?
Yeah, very simple one. I just reiterate what I spoke on the last time we discussed the Frencham one, and that is the principles of ESD, which some of you won't have even heard of or know about, but clearly it's embraced within the Protection of the Environment Administration Act 1991, and therefore also incorporated in the European Act. I just wonder why at times these things are never even discussed or at least referred to, and they're pretty serious matters if one has a look at the definition of ecological sustainable development. I'm amazed sometimes there's no comment, but anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. If there's no other speakers, it's really just noting the report, unless Councillor Whipper wants to make some final comment.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, yeah. And it's just, there is something in the response that says that council can't make submissions against itself. And Councillor McLaughlin reminded me that this will be dealt with by the JRPP. So I'm just a little confused as to why council wouldn't consider putting in a submission, because obviously it's not putting in a submission against itself if it's not actually, sort of considering the proposal. So that to me is a little confusing.
Councillor Whipper, I'll ask Mr. Pepping for clarification as opposed to...
All right, yeah.
Yeah, through the chair. So council is the recipient of the development application. Council assesses the application, and the only difference is that council is reporting the proposal to the Southern Regional Planning Panel for a determination, not being council. So if council staff assess the application, they are going to take all of those factors into part of the assessment and the report that goes to council. If it's recommended for approval, for instance, it'd be rather clumsy if council had a report by an officer that said approval and a submission that said it should be refused.
All right, well, it sounds a bit pedantic, but just a point of clarification, we will get the opportunity to have further comment on this. Mr. Pepping?
Through the chair, no, that's not the case, councillor, because as I said, this does not get reported to council. It goes straight to the Southern Regional Planning Panel for determination. Councillors through the General Manager's office can seek to make representations at that meeting that it's reported if they feel obliged to do so. And other councillors have made that request and been granted that approval in the past.
That was there was a development that's been approved going out of Barrel on the right-hand side that didn't come to council.
All right, so just based on that, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to ask the indulgence of council, and I'd like to change the recommendation that once council receive the consultant's report in relation to impacts on the ecologically endangered community, that report come to council for consideration. If I have a seconder.
So you got one with Councillor Halstead.
Thank you.
The recommendation is basically requesting that the environmental impact statement come to council for...
Well, the consultant's assessment of the impacts on the EEC in relation to the development.
Come to council for consideration.
Yeah, and information, yeah.
Information and consideration.
Yeah.
All right, so the seconder, who was Councillor
It was me, councillor. Okay, Mr. Mayor. I think I seconded.
No, it was Councillor Whipper and Nelson.
Oh, okay.
What Councillor Whipper and Nelson? I've got it as Whipper and Nelson. You happy with the that amendment, or now becomes the motion, Councillor Nelson? So your seconder is in support. Is there anything to speak to it any further, Councillor Whipper?
No, it's just so that we don't lose that opportunity. Thank you.
Councillor Nelson, Councillor Nelson, Turlin, you're muted, Councillor Nelson. Turlin.
Okay, you mentioned Councillor Whipper and you said seconded by Councillor Halstead. Now, we can't see everybody's hands.
No, it wasn't.
Actually,
it was seconded by Councillor Nelson. It came up on the screen for clarification. I couldn't see it either. I'm going to get staff to write down the mover and seconder, Mr. Paul, so I can refer to that, so I don't have to refer to the screen all the time. So councillors Whipper and Nelson were the original mover and seconder. And that's why I called it. So is there any further debate? Then I put the recommendation, all in favour. Carried unanimously nearly, I think. So we move on to 17.2, question with notice, 42/2020 Premier Order. Question from Councillor Turlin and response on page 167.
I have a motion if I can.
Councillor Turlin.
And what I'd like, it's quite strange, is the whole response to be part of the motion. So it's not lost in the ether over the next 5 years. It's an explanation of exactly what council staff...
Not permitted, Councillor Turlin.
Why is it not permitted?
How does the staff carry that into action?
You can't, it's a statement, it's comments, it's not a recommendation. It is an answer to a series of questions.
And the agendas are a public record and the minutes are a public record.
Okay, I accept that. May I ask for a bit more of a briefing on Chelsea Kumunji Gardens, which is on the last page of 166 from Mr. Pepping.
Look, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy for Mr. Pepping to do that briefly because that's not the main subject of what this question of notice is about. So we are a little bit outside of the scope of the agenda of the business paper, but Mr. Pething briefly.
Through the acting general manager, the assessment of that application is coming to a final phase, working through a few things. If it would help council, we could schedule a half-hour briefing on the 14th of October to give you an update on where everything is up to.
I think there would be a benefit for, rather than to try and do any sort of comprehensive response now, do a briefing session, because a little bit has happened since, the DA has been submitted and council staff have been trying to work with the applicant to get the project to move forward. So I think a briefing session would be a good idea, Councillor Turley.
Add that to the recommendation, that's fine.
I'll second that.
Well, we'll do it anyway. It's going to be done just as any normal briefing session.
Yeah,
But
put it in the
that
rec-
received and noted, and two, that a briefing session be held as soon as practicable in relation to Chelsea Gardens, Comungi. And at this
Okay.
time, okay, you happy with that?
Yep.
All right, so it's moved by Councillor Turlin, seconded by Councillor Halstead. Is there any
Mr.
discussion?
Berry, are you not hearing me on this monitor? Could I ask? I said I'll second it.
Okay, staff have said you seconded, I must have been talking myself. Okay, so seconded by Councillor Sandon. Put it all in favour. Carried unanimously. We move over to 18.1, notice of alteration of motion, appointment of council representatives to vacant position on various advisory committees.
Question, if I can. Question.
Well, question, Councillor Turley.
On the minutes, page 13, the motion that's approved says council appoint council laws representative of vacant positions, each as followed advised the committees arising from the resignation of council law Gordon Markwood and so on, the second part of it. Can you tell me who actually voted? So what I'm trying to say is that the rescission motion doesn't relate to the motion that's been approved, because it doesn't isolate any one committee. So I'm a bit confused of why the minutes and then the rescission of
The reason
is
the
different.
reason being, I can defer to Ms. Lingard on this, but my understanding is the reason is that you have to rescind the whole motion.
No,
And
we've got some alternative.
and then the alternative.
This is not a rescission motion. It's notice of motion. Doesn't say rescission motion.
I will
It's
defer.
not correct.
I will defer to Mr. Paul.
Councillor Turlin, to answer your question, it's been the custom and practice here for a long time that when councillors want to alter a decision that's been previously made by council, that they rescind the motion and then put something in its place. But the reality is the Act actually allows for a motion to be altered. It's not been common practice here. So this is effectively a motion seeking to alter a previous motion of council. So it's only altering part of the motion that was passed on the 9th of September, and that relates to the Audit and Risk Improvement Committee. So effectively what you're dealing with is only part of that motion on the 9th of September.
Mr. Paul, may I ask a question?
So then we're going to have two approved motions. Are we going to have two approved motions?
No, Councillor Turlin, if this motion is successful tonight, it supersedes the previous motion in regard to that particular item.
So this is not a rescission motion. This is a motion through the code of meeting practice allows a motion to be brought to alter a motion previously approved.
The Act does.
Yeah, look, as I said, Councillor Turlin, it's not been common practice here, but the Act does allow it. So it's probably a first for me in terms of this council, but the Act does allow it, yes.
Right,
And
so-
who are the votes? Who were the four? Who voted for the four? Who was the 4-3 in relation to the elected?
That's not relevant, councillor. It's not relevant. It was passed. It was passed.
Who was the councillors? Who were the councillors? Who were
Well, It's something that
4-3.
what councillor Turley, that is not relevant to the motion. That is a previous minute. The minutes have been adopted. So and the motion was passed.
So Councillor McLaughlin made a mistake, did he? Councillor McLaughlin made a mistake. Is that what it was?
Probably.
We don't have a motion.
We need a mover and a seconder.
Question, Mr. Mayor. Question, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Scandal, a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor McLaughlin, when he rang me about this last Friday,
Question.
I'm trying to get it out. I mean, Councillor McLaughlin, when he rang me last Friday, said it was a rescission motion that he had signed and submitted. You're saying that you now have a form which is a notice of motion that complied with our closure date.
There is a motion before council. I need a mover and a seconder.
Happy to move it, Mr. Mayor. Happy to move it.
Councillor McLaughlin, I am now after a seconder for that motion. Is there a second for Councillor McLaughlin's motion? Councillor Nelson. Right.
Seconded.
So we moved and seconded. What has happened in the past is now irrelevant. What is before council is legal. Councillor Halstead.
Don't have a problem with any of that. It's just that I'd be a bit concerned that you're sort of picking one bit out only, because quite frank, I assumed, I thought quite rightly so, and I don't need to be corrected on, is that all of this was up for discussion. And to be frank, on the Environment Sustainability Committee, I want to opt out of that one while we're about it. So how are you going to facilitate that, Mr. Mayor?
Well, if it's up for, the motion is up, then that is fine, Councillor Halstead.
Well, I think that's the way to go, because I mean, the rest might be okay. I'm not too sure, but I've had a real good think about that one. And, you know, I don't disagree with what you're trying to do, Mr. Mayor. Let's get on with it.
Okay, so we have before us, Councillor McLaughlin, would you like to speak to it?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's fine. Look, the alteration I rang Councillor Scandred was that I'd voted in error with regard to Councillor Scandred on the Risk and Audit Improvement Committee. And I gave him the option to see if he wanted to just retire from that rather than me put in a rescission motion, but I've done that. And I'd like to replace that and vote for Councillor Andrews on that committee.
So the recommendation that is on page 168, just to get this right, that the name in relation to the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee be altered from Councillor Scandred to Councillor Andrews.
I have a question, please.
Councillor Turl.
In the motion, and in what we did 2 weeks ago, the motion, we have Councillor Andrews actually nominating himself in this motion. But 2 weeks ago, nobody actually, the person nominated didn't nominate themselves, other people nominated them. But now we have council nominating himself for the same position. Is that correct or not?
Well, it's up to Councillor Andrews whether he will accept the nomination as the delegate for the Risk and Audit Committee. Do you accept that nomination, Councillor Andrews? Yes, he does. So the Councillor Andrews has been nominated. Now, is it Councillor Halstead?
Yeah, simple. I'd like to nominate Councillor Turl, then based upon his expertise in financial matters. Seeing as it's open for debate, sounds like it's all open again.
Yes, well, Councillor Halstead nominated Councillor Turl.
I'll accept the nomination.
Is there any other nominations?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Question, Councillor Scandal.
Was a notice of motion duly signed received by Monday 4:30 in time for this meeting?
Yes. The answer from Ms. Lingard is yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are dealing with the Risk and Audit Committee only at this stage. So the Councillor Andrews is the change or the extra through the retirement of Councillor Markwort. We've got that. We have two nominations, Councillor Turland and Councillor Andrews. All those in favour of Councillor Andrews, please raise your card. Councillor Gare, Councillor Andrews, Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Nelson, that's 4. Those voting for Councillor Turland, please raise your hand. Councillor Halstead, Councillor Scandrett, Councillor Turland, Councillor Whipper. It is 4 all. My understanding on a 4 all, we must go to the hat and draw.
No, Mr. Mayor.
Cast a vote on this, I've been correct. So I will use my casting vote to support Councillor Andrews. So we now move on to the Environment and Sustainability Committee. Councillor Halstead is seeking to withdraw.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, would Councillor Turland be interested in coming onto that committee?
Councillor Turland, would you take the position of Environment and Sustainability Committee?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Yep.
Okay, are there any other nominations for the Environment Sustainability Committee? Then if not, then Councillor Turland is duly elected on the Environment Sustainability Committee. Well done.
Thank you.
Is there any other committees while we're here that might need reviewing?
Mr. Mayor, can I just speak?
Yes, Councillor Nelson.
Look, in the Wingecarribee Floodplain Risk Management Committee, I was happy to step down from my position as alternate chair and let Councillor Turland step in because he was previously the chairman. But I'm very happy to be an alternate to that committee, if that could be, if the chairman and if the chairman was happy with that.
Well,
Okay.
we're just checking to see whether there is movement for alternate. So subject to an alternate being permitted on that council, we were checking whether there is an alternate here.
There wasn't, but
So Councillor Halstead, just to
Councillor Halstead is the chair of that committee.
At the previous meeting, Councillor Turland was nominated and elected unopposed as the alternate chair, so there wouldn't be another alternate.
if there's no alternate, I won't worry about it. It's no problem.
There's no alternate. So the recommendations that have been moved and seconded and voted on stand. So if there's no other nominations for any position, we now move
No, she
on.
can delete that.
Okay.
Delete that last bit off.
Okay, so this is the close of the business paper. I'll ask now for a mover to move us into closed committee. Move Councillor Whipper, seconded Councillor Halstead. I'll put that all in favour. Those against, carried. So thank you for the members of the public who are watching on Zoom. Councillor Andrews, I don't know whether I think you might have still holding the world record on council business timeframes. And we will come back out of closed and any recommendations in closed from the committee will be read to the public. So we are now off